Welcome to the Math Ed Podcast. My name is Sam Otten from the University of Missouri, and today I'm joined by two scholars from different parts of the world, but they've been working and collaborating together for years, I think. One is Jana Višňovská, who's from the School of Education in the University of Queensland over in Australia. Jana, thanks so much for being here.
Hello, thank you.
And the other is José Cortina, who's at the National Pedagogical University in Mexico City, Mexico. José, good to see you again.
Oh, great to see you too.
We are going to be talking about a recent article that they had published, and it's open access, easy for people to grab it online, in the journal ZDM, Mathematics Education, or ZDM. And their article is called Curriculum and Mathematical Coherence, Exploring the Tensions in Teaching and Learning Number. So we're going to be getting into some number and fractions and thinking about some primary level mathematics, looking at some curriculum, and also having an international perspective where you're looking in different national contexts. But before we do that, I want to just back up and get some background information. So maybe starting with Jana, where did you do your graduate studies and who did you work with when you were in grad school?
So we are going to make it easy for you because we did study at the same place with the same people, and that's how we
There's
know
the
each other, and that's
connection.
how we
Okay.
are working together for now very, very, very many years. And we met at Vanderbilt University, working with Paul Cobb and Kay McLean, and that's where we met. And Jose was there already when I arrived, and we were a larger group of various seniority of students and professors and postdocs, and it was really nurturing environment to grow up in. And we kind of started to work together there, and we never stopped.
Is that how you recollect it too, Jose?
Yes, I got there before Jana, and then I met Jana a few years after I started my program working with Paul Cobb, and we were there at Peabody College at Vanderbilt. Yes,
Hmm.
both of us.
And now, in terms of dissertations, maybe just really briefly, what did your dissertations focus on?
So I'll start because I was there before. So when I was with Paul Cobb and his team, we were doing design experiments, and mine focused on specific dissertation study where we were looking at ratios and rates, how to support seventh grade students to understand them, all in the context of the wider project, which was in statistics and data analysis.
And when I arrived, the statistics project kind of evolved into a teacher professional development design experiment. And that's where I was working with a middle school group of middle school teachers. We were trying to find ways of supporting their work with the resources that were developed in the prior design research study. And these were teachers who haven't been teaching statistics previously or not very much in their classrooms. And we had this longitudinal project with the group trying to understand what are good ways of collaborating between teachers and researchers, where the aim was to bring type of statistics education into classrooms that we would like to see there. And I think I want to say, because it will be very relevant for the paper that we are going to discuss, that in that environment of doing design research, we were completely immersed in the space where quantity was very important, that mathematics, anything mathematics education was about quantity in primary and middle school, and where we were trying to figure out how to teach students in a way that from their perspective, what was happening in the classroom would always build up, that they wouldn't be exposed to some kind of novel things that they would have to adjust to or get used to, but they would always develop the next set of ideas from those ideas that they were working on previously, and it would feel coherent and it would feel quantitatively substantial. We didn't care very much about curriculum as well, because the idea was we see a lot of kids turning away from mathematics and struggling with learning things that we saw no reason should be difficult for them. And so we were trying to find ways from the scratch, from determining what would be a most sensible end goals for students learning, including where they were at the moment, and trying to figure out pathways to support them in getting in that direction.
And I think that's very important because what Jana said about quantity was central to our work. So both when we were doing statistics and then when I was doing the ratio part, we were always focusing on these being quantitative concepts and kids understanding them quantitative. For us at the time, it was obvious. It was like the only way you could even imagine these things taking place. But as we worked later on, we realized that there were other approaches where it was much more in terms of structure and logic that some people were approaching it. And the other thing is that one of our leading ideas as we work and we chose what to work was when we found out that kids wouldn't understand something, so we would go like backwards and see, oh, maybe they're not understanding, and that's what happened at what point what we were doing. One of the things with which kids struggled with in the ratio work that I did was with fractions as measures. So when we got to fractions, we also looked at them strongly quantitative.
Yeah, so I appreciate this. I wasn't even expecting as setting as good of a stage, but some of these ideas that you're pursuing do trace back to grad school and that work that you've been doing for a while. So I do think you've set some things out that I want to follow through into the ZDM article. So you're looking at curriculum and mathematical coherence. So I just want to probe into that idea a little bit more. So you've talked about coherence here. You've started to describe a little bit of what you mean by that, but maybe take us a little bit further into that. What's important about this idea of coherence, and what had you two really getting into it that then eventually led to this CDM article?
I think the importance of mathematical coherence is not disputed in mathematics education, but we do have very different ways of thinking about what it is, or different degree of clarity, I would say. And we have a very particular take, to the point that we needed to set out in the article that we see quite a bit difference between mathematics of mathematicians and school mathematics. Within mathematics of mathematicians, there is absolutely no question about mathematics being mathematically coherent, because that's how it is built. And that's one of the key criteria for additional ideas being either included or excluded, whether they fit with the whole system that is being built. But what we were trying to make sure gets a lot of attention is that if we teach kids mathematics in a way that they do not feel mathematical coherence as they are building the system that they are familiar with, they will not believe us that mathematics is coherent. And we cannot just tell them, wait until you get to university when these ideas all will click and they will somehow sort into places, and then you will see the mathematical coherence. We strongly believe that in order to keep kids engaged and wanting and curious to pursue the mathematics in the classroom, it is super important that they view mathematics as something that they can grow, and where the ideas truly are built with connections, with the coherence, in a way that mathematicians would recognize that process as being inherently mathematical. And I think that's the brief description of what we mean by mathematical coherence, that we do not want to have situations in a classroom where I, as a teacher, would have to come in and say, oh, kids, today we are going to do this. Just bear with me. We will learn something about it, and then I will give you illustrations. I would much rather, and actually I insist that what we do in a classroom is that I bring up some of the things that we've been doing previously, and maybe bring kids' attention to the fact that with the new problem, the tools that we've already developed are no longer sufficient. And what are we going to do now? And I would want some ideas, some suggestions to come from the students, and in some way patch from those ideas whatever is the way forward. And that process of kids seeing themselves as going in this way forward, that's what we kind of label as mathematical coherence.
I mean, I can dare to give you a kind of an example that's related to the paper. But if we really engage kids and let them to associate whole number just with discrete quantities, always with discrete quantities, and then we want them to think about fractions as being genuine numbers, it's just like, what is this, right? So in order for that to happen from a design a research perspective, you probably would want to have an intermediate step where you help them to see that whole numbers are also used in continuous measurement, for instance, in continuous quantities. And that might then give you that, help them to see that this is coherent, that it's not just, okay, that was not a number. Now this is also a number. Just throwing in a new kind of definition or understanding of number.
Yeah, and so this is some of your ideas that you're bringing into it, but you also faced some challenges. And so maybe you're alluding to one of the challenges right there, which is if number is always discrete, if number is always counting objects or something, that feels like that's going to have some tension with where you want to expand next. Like you're trying to build a coherent thing,
Yeah.
but if the current situation is very discrete and it's very much not setting the stage for where you want to go next,
Yeah.
then that one of the tensions that's involved,
That's
and that
right.
came from the paper, and maybe say more about that.
So the only thing that teachers then can do is to do what I said I don't want to be doing. Walk into a classroom and say, oh, this is our new animal that we are going to study today. We haven't
We've got
seen
a
it
new
before,
thing to
but just
learn.
bear with me.
Yeah.
It has one number on the top, then a line, and then another number in the bottom, and then I will give you some examples. And for the kids who have always only encountered numbers as being individual and as being used for counting, this kind of conglomerate of collection of numbers is very hard to see as a number in its own right.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, there is no mathematical way to progress from discrete whole numbers into fractions other than what is done in academic mathematics, where we have definitions of all number sets being set theoretical, and those elements of those sets are all discrete.
Yeah.
And rational numbers are pairs of numbers. And in that universe, it is a coherent way of extending from natural numbers into rational numbers, but that is not a coherent extension that we can do in a primary school.
Yeah.
And what we do instead is some kind of simplification, but that simplification introduces incoherence in the process by which we are arriving at fractions.
Yeah.
At the moment.
And just as a quick pause, in case listeners are not familiar with the kind of the group theory, ring theory version of like fractions, you can just abstractly define fractions to be a set of numbers, a pair of numbers, and then you define what does addition mean? It means do this. What does multiplication mean? It means do this. And you just abstractly just tell the rules of the game. And then it will work. Like you can do math and you can prove things and you can go to town, and mathematicians, are great at doing this. But yeah, and so in case folks weren't familiar with sort of that level of abstract algebra,
Yeah.
you can build a system of fractions that operate and do all that stuff, but it's not really what you would go to a second or third grader with, and then say, hey, here are the abstract operations that we've defined. Although I think I'm alluding to another part of your paper, which is the new math efforts. But before we go there, though, I do want to just pause and see, were there other tensions at play, or is that counting objects, and really associating number with counting objects so strongly? Is that the main tension, or others as well?
That's the one we focus on the paper, and I think it serves as an example.
Yep.
I just want to say that in terms of the way how we are talking about this in the paper, we are describing the tension between the curricular sequencing and the instructional improvement recommendations, because we all agree that mathematics should be built in a way where kids from their own previous activity find the need for the next step, and they can extend mathematics, perhaps with some input from the teacher in where, we can enrich their set of choices, but they are still the ones who are making a decision. We all agree on this in principle as mathematics education research community, I believe. But we are not necessarily aware that often curricula are not built in the way that mathematical sequencing would even allow for that sort of progression to exist.
Oh, I see.
Where there are these things that in the 1980s, Anna Svard was pointing out, we are parachuting mathematical ideas onto the students instead of developing them. And so fractions are one of the first and most obvious ideas of where this parachuting happens, where this disconnection is there in a curriculum, and it cannot be overcome by any amount of miraculous pedagogy or instruction.
And what I wanted to point out, it's very similar to what Jana was saying, that as you want to create this coherence right? If you're doing these developments of these instructional sequence, you start to have to introduce ideas that are not in the curricula and that clash with the curricula, right? So why are you teaching whole number in the context of measurement if it was fractions said you were going to be doing, right? So in order to achieve this coherence for the kids, you start to find these tensions with the curricula, and it's this tension that's in the paper too, right? Between these recommendations, these instructional recommendations, and what's actually compulsory that's in the official curriculum.
I see. So if I'm tracking this right, there's the tension between the sort of mathematical content, which is that students are really grasping on counting and number, and they're putting those together so tightly that it's discrete counting, and that's their way of thinking about number. That's in tension with where we want to take them, which we want to take them in a more quantitative, continuous, more versatile way of thinking about numbers. But then you're also pointing out a tension that's actually in the system of education. It's like the tension between what we are trying to do as a math ed community, and then also the textbook materials, the curriculum materials that are ingrained in the school context. And that's maybe why it's great to have you from two different national contexts, looking at Mexican curriculum, looking at Australian curriculum, and starting to look carefully like, hey, is this a worldwide problem, or is this something that's sort of different in different places?
Yeah.
Or is that tension there all over the place? So yeah, take me into the curriculum, because you now in this article, you also did kind of a careful look at curricula. What brought you to that curricula? What did you see when you looked at it with these ideas in mind?
So let me do one more slight step back.
Okay.
So as we were developing that sequence for teaching fractions, so that kids would come to see fractions as just another number, which is an obvious extension of what they were doing previously, I realized in Australia that it was really unethical for me to go to year 3, year 4 classrooms and try to convince teachers to do something with me with the sequence that we were developing, because we were telling them not to do what the curriculum was asking them to do, and we were doing other things instead, so that curricular sequencing was like in a real conflict. So for now, I and my students are working with year 7 classrooms, because by that time they are supposed to know everything about fractions. They more or less know very little, and so it doesn't matter in which order we are going to go through.
I can also say from the
this.
United States that not everybody in grade 7 knows everything about fractions yet. I think that's a universal
So
thing.
we do know that is a big problem, but it really doesn't have to be. And I think part of the difficulty is that in the way how we sequence the curriculum, it emerges as a problem that is impossible or nearly impossible to overcome. And we never would have predicted that. I think we are onto something. I think we are getting classrooms full of kids who can compare any pairs of fractions correctly as if they were whole numbers by size. And they are not doing it by calculation. They are doing it by imagining how much those different amounts are. And so the interesting idea that we started to struggle with then is, okay, if there is a way to teach fractions well, why are we doing it so wrong in classrooms, in curricula? Where did those ideas come from? That it cannot be that, we just decided to do things the hardest possible way that there is. And we were very lucky in our kind of path by meeting other people who were doing other research, including in history of mathematics education. And we came to understand that the sequence that we were developing was actually very, very similar to how fractions used to be taught, specifically in France at the beginning of the 20th century. We kind of poked into it more and more, and we started to understand, started to think in terms of, oh, we are really focusing on quantity. We are really thinking about these things as amounts. We are helping kids to think about them as amounts. And that's what mathematics used to be like once upon a time. But then for a while, again, knowing from analysis of curricula just after new math reform, then for a while, mathematics wasn't like that at all. And quantity disappeared from there. But we were curious to know whether, we are now 2025, we are a long way from the new math reform. So we decided to look into our current curricula in Australia and Mexico and see what were the resources, the conceptual resources that kids would build up as they are learning number by the time that they need to be thinking about fractions. And so we brought these questions about, is there any quantity? In what way it is being treated? Is there any continuous quantity? Is there any measurement that is being treated as the precursor to number? Because we were reading all these literature, mostly written by mathematicians analyzing curricula, Hans Freudenthal, Hyman Bass. We were reading about how actually numbers can be seen as kind of mathematizing of measurement, where you want to compare where is more and where is less, and you want to get greater and greater precision in those kinds of comparisons. And so numbers are one of the good ways where, one of the things that you are comparing to another is being taken as a unit and iterated to express all the other different, let's say, lengths relative to one another. We can do that by assigning numbers on the amount of iteration that we are doing of something.
I think that what we were doing then is that we realized that the curriculum was not helping us to use and in upscale, right? Even the possibility of upscaling what we were being able to do with kids in fractions, right? When we had this leeway, we could do it with, I mean, as Jana described it, with these kids really comparing fractions and thinking them as sizes and placing those sizes in a number line. But as we were doing that, we realized this conflict with the curricula, and I think that one thing that we decided to approach was to try to understand why is the curricula the way it is, right?
We wanted to look into the curriculum and find those instances where measurement would be used as something that is setting up the meaning of number, so that then that could be extended into going into fractions. And so we then took those two curricula, we developed a rubric by which we were going to try to find all the possible instances in which quantities and continuous quantities specifically were there.
Mm-hmm.
And we were not expecting to find much, but how little we found was surprising even for us. The curricula really introduced number in early years entirely as a counting number. There was no hint of anything additional, really.
In both countries?
In both of those instances, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Here and there, there would be these it's very hard to describe it in a spoken language rather than rubrics, but there have been these attempts, kind of half-hearted attempts, like people would tell me often in Australia, but we use number line, right? That is a continuous model for working with whole numbers. But the way how number line is used is mostly as sort of a cloth line on which you hang pegs with the digits on them. So it isn't the interpretation of accumulation of length in relation to number is completely absent. And you can see it when you ask kids, you hold a ruler at 0 and 10, and you ask them how many centimeters, and they tell you 9, because they are counting the notches with numbers that are visible. And that is kind of representative of how they are working with those number line representations many times, that they can be still used for counting. And they still keep the order of numbers, and some are on the left and some are on the right. And they do, even in that very limited capacity, they do make some of the number work easier, but it is still just counting work. There isn't the sense of measurement with which those tools could be interpreted.
Yeah, and whenever there's a moment like that where there's a representation that might have the potential for some of these more conceptual ways of thinking about it or these more flexible ways of thinking about it, I always wonder, though, how many students are actually seeing it in that way. And what I've kind of found in my research and reading other people's research is many of the students are just taking the surface level version of it. They're just counting the tick marks or they're just seeing the numbers. So even though the number line could allow for a quantitative measurement kind of view, it doesn't mean the majority of students are seeing it that way. The teacher might realize the potential of that and see it flexibly. A few of the students might be using it flexibly both ways, like as discrete numbers on the number line and as measurement. But I would usually bet money that like a majority of the students are probably just looking at those numbers, like the discrete numbers, even though you're putting them on a number line.
So the thing is that if we don't remind teachers that this is something that is really crucial to make available to all the students and make sure that these students are thinking about it in those ways, we are not putting these kinds of reminders.
Make it the actual focus.
Even if teachers know and they interpret it in that way, they wouldn't necessarily know that there is another way that students might be doing.
But one of the things that was striking about that analysis also was how these similarities were between the two curricula. And there was really no reason for the Mexican curricula to be similar to the Australian, because as we're far away in many, many ways, not only physically, but also, I mean, one was developed by the British Empire and the other one was attached to the Spanish Empire and blah, blah, blah. But still there were these staggering similarities. And one thing we also realized was that the only reference that was clear about what was number was discrete. And then, like, there was the number topics did not mention whether you should use discrete or continuous quantity, but most of them would fit or work when operations and number were addressed if you stayed with discrete quantities. Mm-hmm. So we realized that there was very, very little explicitly said for teachers to associate the meaning of number with continuous quantity.
So I feel like this is a passion area for both of you. We could probably talk for many, many more hours about this, I can tell. But I want to actually just see where have you left off after writing this? And I direct people to the open access article that they can grab. But like, what do you see as next steps, or what do you see as what our field should do with some of these insights that you've gained and that you've really analyzed from multiple perspectives? What could we do as next steps, or where do you see the field needing to go after this?
I think that the approach we taken in the article was to show people that this isn't accidental and that there are these, what we identified in the analysis is very closely aligned with some of the problems that were introduced into curricula in the new math reform. And we were trying to bring from other people's analysis illustrations of the pre and post new math to first kind of make it more, create more awareness about the fact that quantity has disappeared as a result of the new math reform because mathematicians' mathematics no longer deals with things like quantity. The reason that mathematicians reconceptualized mathematics was because they needed it to be apart from reality in order to be able to do harder, more advanced mathematical work. They needed to have a system that is kind of its own rather than being constantly attached to reality. But in classrooms, we want this other thing. We want mathematics to grow from something that children know. And so what we were trying to show is that mathematics of quantity that existed pre-new math or pre-modern mathematics actually has a lot of resources in that space where all of those ideas were once developed from reality, and they were at the first place developed from thinking about world around us, about the world of quantities, about that layer of the world. And so because that coming really strongly to prioritizing students' work with quantities worked for us when we were designing the instructional sequences that we are trialing, we thought that that would be potentially a very good starting point. But of course, we do want students at the end of their journey to arrive at the modern mathematics, at the stuff which is very abstract. And there has been work done in mathematics education by people who are showing how exactly this could be done in the classrooms. That the same way where the abstraction lifts happened, but when I say the same way, I just mean that there have been abstraction lifts in history of mathematics, and they had to happen in order for mathematics to progress. that we should be seeking ways of creating situations in classrooms where students would experience a need for such a lift to happen, because otherwise they will be stuck at a problem that they cannot solve. And so there are illustrations that have been put forth in how that process can work. It is true that so far we have always tried to create our curricula by looking at what academic mathematicians are doing and then trying to kind of bring it back from that space. But the problem is that academic mathematics has shifted to a place where it is not actually beneficial for us to do it from that starting point. And so starting from classical mathematics, which was much more aligned with how learning in the classroom at the primary level can happen, is a legitimate alternative. And we, I think, are suggesting to explore that alternative because, of course, we do not have all the answers. We are trying to bring about the conversation about these ideas and bring the awareness of something that is happening in our curricula, and we don't seem to be paying attention to that at all. And it may be undermining all our other efforts in mathematics education, because we are all trying to accomplish the same thing. We are all trying to make classroom mathematical activities of students being actually mathematical. And for some reason, we haven't been succeeding in that. And if that reason is the structure of our curricula, that would be, relatively easy to fix. Now, saying that, relatively easy to fix curricula is probably impossible. But, at least we need to talk about whether that is the next step.
It is easier to fix curricula than it is human nature, for example, or human development.
But I would like to add to what Jana is saying as we think about where to go. I think that a lot of times we've taken the curriculum as given, and that's what we work around, right? So we have to focus on teachers, we have to focus on student learning, we have to look at misconceptions, etc. But I think that it's important, and this comes from this paper, that we would like people to go back and see how the curriculum is structured, why it's structured that way, and whether it's working for us as a mathematics education community to achieve what we are pursuing, or if it's worth starting to rethink issues and bring about, right? And just an example, I mean, there's a lot of the term rational number around there, right? Associated with, so what kind of work is that term doing, and which comes from modern mathematics, and do we want to rethink how it affects our work in terms of thinking about improving teaching and learning of mathematics?
I appreciate those thoughts for the field. I also want to ask you individually, or maybe yourself as collaborators, what is on your mind still, or what are you working on next? It seems like you two always have something going on.
There's like 5 things or 6, but I'll let Jana. But related to this.
So yeah, we are, I think, trying to find ways to understand what it is that would be good to happen in space of quantity, right? Both, I mean, it's an area in mathematics education where a number of people have been writing about, and there are kind of different approaches. Now we kind of created a framework, right? By thinking about what is the conceptual source of school mathematics. Are we starting from academic mathematics of modern mathematics, or are we starting from classical mathematics? Are we aware of the distinction? Different people who are trying to find answers to these questions they have implicitly or explicitly very different starting points. So, for example, it is happening to us a lot when we say that we are doing fractions in context of measurement. People say, oh, so you are doing what Davidov has done already. And the interesting difference is that Davidov's approach was highly structured around modern academic mathematics. His guidelines in what students were kind of hoping, what he was hoping to accomplish with the students in the classroom was around structural mathematical regularities that are meaningful within modern academic context. So even though he had a very, very strong intuition and understanding of importance of quantitative and translating into algebraic regularities, there are differences in what was the driver for those curricular decisions. And so one of the things that we would like to understand a little bit is how we are similar and different in this space, and bring about this awareness that our implicit assumptions make a difference. And so when we are trying to make sense of literature, not to just kind of go blindly, I mean, it's very hard to make interpretation of work which uses the same word, but has very different meaning hidden behind it. And so we are kind of doing a little bit about unpacking that. And we are trying to do that in the context of fractions specifically, in terms of, all this kind of very well used theorizing in the space of fraction and rational number learning, which again, because of where it comes from, brings very different recommendations. And so untangling that space could also, we are hoping, help to first generate conversation, but also perhaps encourage more people to look into this space in terms of design, because we do need to figure out how to teach all of these ideas in progression. And it's not something that we would want to take on our shoulders single or double-handedly, but it's something that, if there is a concerted effort, it could be advanced, hopefully enough for the kids no longer to turn away when you say the word fractions.
What I would reflect on, and probably it's at a different level, is in our work. I think what has shifted is that when we think about improving mathematics education, at least I started thinking about students learning, right? How do we help kids, right? And it's also been on teachers, right? How do we get teachers to teach well? And so the problem has been either in the students' learning or in the teachers' work. But I think that we have to keep going and think about what are we organizing at a higher level, right? And whether that is really supporting the teachers or sending them into difficulties, and same with the kids. So rethink these curricular issues. I mean, as not placing the problem in the learning, just in the learning or just in what teachers do, but in how we are organizing teaching.
And when we are designing now, when we go to classrooms and we do classroom design studies, we are always thinking about manageability of doing that kind of teaching by the teachers. And so in our collaborations, we are paying a lot of attention to, working with new PhD students who are full-time teachers. They are collecting data on how difficult was it to start to work with materials that were absolutely unknown to them initially, and what were some of the things that helped them to persist and some of the things that were really difficult, so that we understand not just the progression of tasks that would be perhaps suitable for students to engage with, but kind of a rationale that from the teacher's perspective can make much sense. And also development of materials that would have this kind of quick response to convince the teacher that what they are starting to do perhaps is worth continuing. And so I think we are trying, not that we have too many answers in that space, but we find it extremely important in terms of having a chance to get something into the classrooms. The resources that we are developing have to speak to teachers in a way that the teachers would choose them. And so that's another avenue. And then we also started to venture into philosophy of education a little bit, and we've been reading Gertz Bista's work and trying to, for the purposes of mathematics education, trying to develop a language that could support our efforts at what we are trying to do in terms of students' engagement in classrooms. And so Vista is trying to make a very big difference between, students being treated as objects in a classroom of somebody else's wishes and desires, which is not unheard of.
Mm-hmm.
And as a counterpart to this, trying to find ways to make students become subjects of their own mathematical activity, where they would view themselves as someone who is able to and willing to make decisions about what needs to happen. And so, yeah, those are some of the things that we've been trying to grapple with.
Wow. Yeah. You mean we're not just supposed to train the little ones to start cranking out numbers the way we showed them how to do it?
So the thing is that, again, like Sam, we are not doing anything groundbreaking. I think most of the stuff that we are trying to do, there will be a large community of mathematics education researchers who would not find those things contentious. But there is some problem because we have very little success in bringing other people on board.
Yeah.
And so finding convincing arguments or convincing examples and illustrations, or I don't know, if we cannot speak to people's rational minds, we need to speak to their emotions.
Yeah.
I just don't know what else to do.
No, I'm right with you there, and I know Jose's work at PMUNA has inspired me in this area too with my research team, which is the math ed scholarly community has consensus. We have really clear ideas about certain things, about instruction and how to treat students and all these things. But you're right. In the US, it's not spreading across the country. And now it sounds like in other countries, it's not really spreading. And so I agree with you. We have to kind of take a new look at some of these things, try to diagnose what's holding it up, what's causing the tension, what's causing the failure for it to spread. And I feel like we need to really work thoughtfully and hard at getting our math ed ideas to actually take hold and have a real chance of actually going, across many schools and across reality and across the countryside. So yeah, I'm with you on that. But I really appreciated the conversation. Folks can check out the article, Curriculum and Mathematical Coherence in ZDM or ZDM. That's open access article. Jana Višňovská from Australia and Jose Cortina over in Mexico. Thanks for joining me. I want to ask one more quick question before you go. This was from when I was in grad school. I had an upper level doc student named Aaron Brackenecki, and he asked this question when we had guests, and I've used it ever since. And I thank him for sharing this question with me. But if you were not in math ed, is there something else you imagine possibly doing as an alternative career? Maybe Jana first and then Jose.
Oh, really? I naively like to think that I would be a mathematician.
Okay.
I don't know. That's what I started off with. And I kind of, because I was always working with kids around Mathematical Olympiad and similar types of free time activities, actually those are responsible for me learning mathematics rather than whatever's happening in classrooms, which is tragic in its own right. But that's why I was kind of sucked into the world of mathematics education, trying to see how could we make what was happening in those math camps happen in classrooms, because that was a way that some people at least could learn rather seamlessly, not even knowing they were learning. But I did like doing mathematics, and I didn't know, because that was not very obvious at university, what would some of the mathematical careers be. But now I do have some friends we grew up, and I see what they are doing, and I think it's pretty cool.
Well, in my case, I think I would like to be a preschool teacher, kindergarten teacher. That's what brought me to education, working with little kids and spending time with little kids. And it also brought me to education when I started to see the cool things you could do when working with little kids around issues of mathematics. So probably that's where I think I might have really liked to be also.
Wow. Wouldn't you be exhausted though at the end of every day? Because that's what I've observed. My grandma, my mom, my wife have all done elementary and some of the early grades, and I just feel like you're just wiped out at the end of the day.
Yeah, sure. Oh, I admire the teachers that I work with at the preschool level. I mean, it's kudos every time I go to one of their schools or their classrooms. It's amazing. I don't know if I would have been able to.
It can be a nice dream.
Yeah.
Same for me. You don't know until you do it.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to just speak some more about your work. Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.